Hello and welcome to all of you. My name is Teresa Blumenstein, and I am the coordinator of the Justice Coalition of Religious. I am based in the United States, where JCoR has our office across the street from the headquarters of the United Nations. And it's my pleasure to welcome all of you as leaders of your congregations, as well as promoters and representatives and formators in the area of JPIC, or Justice, Peace, and Integrity of Creation. And I am joined today in our introduction and information session on JCoR by our associate coordinator, Katie. And I'll invite her to introduce herself now as well.
Thanks, Teresa. My name is Katie Garrison, and I'm the Associate Coordinator of the Justice Coalition of Religious. I am based out of our New York office here with Teresa, and some of you already may be familiar with some of my work if you have received any of our communications or our monthly bulletins or any of our resources like UN conference engagement guides. And if all of that sounds foreign to you, don't worry, we will be introducing all of those materials and resources to you at a later point in today's presentation. I'm happy to be here, and I hope to get to know all of you better over the course of the presentation.
Wonderful. So in our time together today, we will offer an introduction to both what the Justice Coalition of Religious is, some of the activities that we have undertaken thus far, and we will also talk about the nature of the work that we do, which is to advocate for and to promote the realization of justice and peace in our world by advocating with political leadership at multiple levels. So before we get into all of that, I will begin by inviting us all to come together in a brief prayer. And Katie, will you lead this for us?
Yes. So we invite you to either close your eyes and enter into this space of reflection with us, or you are also welcome to read along with the text on your page, however you are feeling most called to this spiritual practice today. Leadership is hard to define. God, let us be the ones to define it with justice. Leadership is like a handful of water. God, let us be the people to share it with those who thirst. Leadership is not about watching and correcting. God, let us remember it is about listening and connecting. Leadership is not about telling people what to do. God, let us find out what people want. Leadership is not about the love of power. God, help us to make it more about the power of love. Let us walk in the path Christ has set, and let those who will follow. Let our greatest passion be compassion, our greatest strength, love, our greatest victory, the reward of peace. In leading, let us never fail to follow. In loving, let us never fail. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Katie. And now we will jump right into that introduction to the coalition. So to offer a background to those who are truly joining us for the first time, who have not participated in any of our programs before, JCoR is a coalition of 23 organizations that represent Catholic sisters, brothers, priests, and their partners at the United Nations. And they are able to do that because each organization has an accreditation with the United Nations, as well as representatives who are serving at UN headquarters in New York. And all of the organizations are committed to improving the well-being of people who are living in poverty, as well as the well-being of our natural environment. And as a group, we have a presence in over 100 countries. And here is the full list of member organizations that have come together to form the coalition. You will see either your own congregation or a group to which your congregation belongs somewhere here in this list. And the shared mission that brings the whole group together is to facilitate collaboration among members of all of their congregations, as well as their partners, who are working at the grassroots or at the United Nations in order to strengthen one another's capacity to conduct advocacy and then to actually follow through and collectively conduct that advocacy for social, economic, and environmental justice and peace. And we do that not only at this global or international space of the United Nations, but also to facilitate that collective action at the regional level and the national level. And before I dive more into a description of our work, we use the word advocacy quite frequently in describing our work. And so that is a term that can be understood many different ways to mean many different things. And so as a point of clarity, before we proceed, I want to offer that when we use the word advocacy, we are referring to any combination of public actions and private actions that promote movement toward justice in our society's social, economic, and environmental systems and structures. And this includes a very wide variety of activities, such as speaking to or informing a community or the political leaders of that community about a concern, writing letters or statements, joining or organizing public rallies or demonstrations that address a particular injustice that we are observing. And we will discuss the specific details of what advocacy looks like later on, but I wanted to offer that common definition right at the beginning so that we can proceed with that common understanding. So why did JCoR come together at this particular moment, especially when we know we have so many other ways that we are creating networks and making connections among congregations? And the reason for this network is, in a way, reading the signs of the times to ensure that we are always preparing ourselves to be new wineskins for new wine. And in reading of the signs of the times, we felt that there was a real call to us to work more in coalition than to work independently as we have been. And some of those signs that we were reading were, first of all, the trend of seeing smaller numbers of vocations to religious life on a global scale, and recognizing that that trend requires some changes from us. One of those changes is that we adopt more creative approaches to the ministries that we are conducting in order to retain the wisdom of the unique charism and the unique history of each congregation, while at the same time drawing strength in the numbers of all who hold our mission in common, the common mission of all congregations. And another thing that was required of us in recognizing this trend in religious life was that we need to confront certain questions of justice that are beneath the question of our own sustainability as congregations. We need to ask ourselves, how will the dignity of the people that we serve be upheld on the day that we can no longer provide this charitable ministry here in this particular community? What system will fulfill the rights of this people or this community when we are not here to fulfill the right to food or shelter or healthcare? And so we wanted to grapple with those difficult questions and confront who or what will ensure the dignity of all people, even if our congregation does not have a presence in every community where we are today. Another sign of the times that we needed to read was that political spaces are becoming more closed or restricted and less receptive to the voices of civil society, meaning all of us who are not employees of government. And we recognize that those political spaces are most closed to the voices of the most marginalized communities, the very same communities in which congregations have done the majority of our work throughout history. And so recognizing this sign, we saw a call to speak with a more organized and unified voice that would allow us to make the most of the political spaces that are still available to us, and also to work together to protect the spaces that we still have, to prevent them from becoming even more and more restricted. A third sign of the times that we were reading were the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals by the United Nations. And I'm sure many, if not all of you on this call, have some familiarity with the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, which were adopted as the agenda of the entire UN system for the years 2015 to 2030. And all of them put together aim to alleviate the human and environmental suffering in all its forms that we are currently witnessing in our world. And while this agenda is very beautiful and paints a picture that is well aligned with what we would envision the reign of God or the city of God to look like, we also recognized that the agenda might just be words on paper, and it might not be implemented for the most vulnerable or the most excluded people if there is not a strong system of accountability and participation from all members of society. And we also recognized that, again, given the presence of religious congregations among so many of those marginalized and excluded communities, we recognize that there is both an opportunity and a very valuable role for members of religious congregations to be actively participating in both the implementation of these goals and also monitoring the progress of governments toward achieving them within every nation. And so we need to be doing this not only among the representatives who are seated at the UN in New York, but that it was going to be the work of the whole congregation inside the communities and countries that are committed to working toward the agenda together. So the approach that the coalition has taken is to begin by undertaking our effort in specific regions of the world to bring together the efforts of religious and their partners to make a stronger and more unified call for justice, equity, sustainability, and respect for rights. And so we started with organizing and bringing together congregations in Latin America and the Caribbean, in East and Southern Africa, in India, and of course, all of those who are working as representatives of the congregations at UN headquarters. And in each of these places, we began the work by offering a circuit or a set of initial workshops that were held from the years 2019 through the present year. And each workshop involved multiple days of dialogue and opportunities to learn about advocacy, as well as to conduct planning among the members of congregations and partners who participated to address certain issues of justice and peace that they recognized as a problem for the communities that they serve there in that place. And following each workshop, there was then the establishment of a regional network for that place. And the purpose of these networks was to facilitate ongoing collaboration and communication among congregations in a given region so that they could continuously communicate and conduct the work of designing advocacy initiatives and realizing those advocacy initiatives that respond to whatever need they have identified for systemic change in their region. And these networks are supported through additional training opportunities that are related to the exact issue that they have identified as a priority. And they are also supported and coordinated by a local coordinator for their region. And to accompany whatever advocacy initiatives are being conducted at our local or national levels, those who are at the United Nations then seek to reinforce those advocacy initiatives through work and advocacy at the UN level. And participation in these workshops, as well as these networks, has from the beginning been open to members of all congregations of Catholic religious, as well as their ministry partners, because we did not want to limit the openness of our channels to having a voice at the United Nations, did not want to limit that to only those who have a full-time or part-time representative here in New York, but to really be open to as much of the global community of religious and the experiences and perspectives of religious as we possibly could. So thus far, we have conducted workshops and established networks for advocacy in all of these places you can see on the screen here. And I will just, to give you some visual sense of who has been engaged and involved, I will move through a series of images from each of our workshops. And as I show you these, I will also share that these slides will all be shared with you after this meeting today. So you will have time to revisit the images as well as the information in your own time and at your leisure. And the slides will also be shared in Spanish and French, as well as English. Okay, so before I proceed to talking more about the details of how advocacy works, what it looks like, and why we even see this as a ministry, I want to pause and see if there were any questions or need for clarification on anything that I have shared thus far about JCoR.
Teresa, there is one question in the chat box from Sister Rose. Sister Rose, would you like to unmute yourself and read out your question?
Hello, great work that you are doing. But I was wondering, with the regional groups, is there a way of contacting some of them? Because we have sisters in the Caribbean and all over the world, so it would be great to be able to contact different groups, if that would be possible. Thank you.
Wonderful question. Thanks, Sister Rose. And the answer is yes, definitely yes. And when we reach the end of our session today, the last piece of input that we will offer will be some of those concrete ways that you, as well as your members, can be engaged with the work of JCoR. And that will include the contact information of each of our regional coordinators, as well as some of the links as to how any individual can join one of the WhatsApp groups, which is the primary way that our regional networks stay in communication with one another. So we will share all of that detail in the final segment of our session today. I do not see any other questions at this time, so we will move ahead. And so in the next section, I would like to speak a bit about why and how religious congregations are engaging with the United Nations. And so I title this section Spiritual Leadership, because I think you will hopefully see the important ways in which there is both a need for spiritual leadership in the work of the United Nations, and also the way that the United Nations offers a secular form of response to what we could understand as spiritual challenges and spiritual work that we are called to do. So first, we'll engage with the question of why religious congregations are engaging with the UN system. And we take as our foundation and our starting point, of course, the principles of Catholic social teaching, such as solidarity, the rights of workers, a system of rights and responsibilities, concern or preferential option for the poor, care for creation, a call to family, community, and participation in the life of our society. And of course, that all of these should together uphold human dignity. And with those principles in mind, I invite you to turn your attention to some of the most important documents and frameworks that comprise the United Nations system, and to be open to similarities and echoes of our own Catholic social teaching that you might hear in the work and the structure of the UN itself. So I begin with the foundational document of the UN, which is essentially its mission statement, the UN Charter. It begins, "We, the peoples of the United Nations." And there I underline peoples to remind us that indeed this institution is not meant to be only a meeting place of governments, and not only a place for those who are holders of tremendous power to speak to one another and decide the fate of the whole, but it is really meant to be a meeting place for all peoples of the world to participate together in critical decision-making. So the Charter says, "We, the peoples of the United Nations, set out to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, to reaffirm faith in human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, the equal rights of men and women, nations large and small, to establish justice, to promote social progress and better standards of life, to live together in peace with one another as good neighbors, to maintain international peace, to ensure that armed force shall not be used, and to promote the economic and social advancement of all peoples." And of course, we recognize that the United Nations system does not always live up to the ideals that are set forth here in this mission statement, but it is valuable for us to understand that this is really the purpose of the UN system, and this at its core is what the UN was designed to achieve and to create in our world. Another very important component of the UN system that we might want to recognize is the human rights framework, which is a very large body of different conventions and agreements and treaties that essentially communicate a global consensus around how we understand and interpret what human dignity looks like, what it involves, and how we can agree to sustain and even fulfill it as a human community. And so some of the documents that are part of this framework, which really are the framework of the entire UN system, include documents that define universal human rights, civil and political rights, economic, social, and cultural rights, rights that are particular to migrant workers and their families, rights of persons with disabilities, and rights of children. The framework also addresses some of the greatest challenges of our time, some of the patterns that are violating human rights that we need to work to address together. These are conventions like those on the discrimination against women, those that seek to eliminate torture, and another on the elimination of racial discrimination. Taken together, we can look at this list or whole cadre of documents as a way of communicating the principles of Catholic social teaching in secular language. And again, when we look at the world that is envisioned by the Sustainable Development Goals, when we think of no poverty, hunger, good health care for all, education for all, gender equality, water, work for everyone, reduced inequalities, care for the environment in all of its components, and peace through strong and good governance. This is a secular vision and secular language for what we would perhaps describe if we were asked to describe the reign of God or the city of God. And in this way, through this space and through this language, that vision is made accessible to people of all faith backgrounds and no faith background. And indeed, this work of building this city becomes the work of all people, as of course it needs to be. And to offer a bit of endorsement to say that it is not only the opinion of myself or of religious congregations that the UN has a spiritual component to it, I'd like to offer you a bit of testimony from the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, who is the highest ranking diplomat in the UN system, and who wrote in a recent reading guide for the Laudato Si encyclical. And in it, he wrote, "The spiritual dimensions of the work of the United Nations tend to be overlooked and underappreciated. Yet the tenets that are set out in the Charter, peace, justice, equality, the dignity and worth of the human person, these echo the teachings of the world's religious traditions, and they summon us all to reduce human suffering. As we reflect on Laudato Si in 2021, the state of our common home is broken. This is an epic policy test, but ultimately, this is a moral test." So there, a very strong statement from the headmost leader of the UN system, saying that the challenges that the UN faces and that is attempting to organize the peoples of the world to address together, those challenges are ones that we meet through the vehicle of policy, but the bigger challenge that we are contending with is really a moral challenge, which requires moral and spiritual leadership. And from the other side of things, we have also heard from some of our spiritual leaders that indeed even our work as spiritual leaders should or does have a political realm or component to it as well. And in fact, in Evangelii Gaudium, Pope Francis tells us that politics remains a lofty vocation and one of the highest forms of charity, inasmuch as it seeks the common good. Charity is a principle not only of micro relationships, such as those with our friends and family members or other small groups that we know, but that charity is also a principle of macro relationships, our social, economic, and political relationships. So an openness to the transcendent can bring about a new political and economic mindset that would bring about the common good of society. So now that we have established a bit about why it is that we would feel a call and respond to a call to participate in what is understood as a political space, even as spiritual communities and leaders, I will explore a little bit about how it is that we are actually able to engage with the UN system as members of religious congregations rather than as representatives of government. So first, it's important to understand that in the UN system, anyone who is not representing government is there essentially as an NGO or non-governmental organization. Though we often do not understand ourselves under that same label, that is how the UN understands our participation. And there are about 30 NGOs that have accreditation with the United Nations to collectively represent over 200 congregations of Catholic religious. And of course, that number difference is a result of the fact that many of those 30 NGOs are representing multiple congregations. And through that presence of religious NGOs, there has been a history and a relationship established among the community of both government representatives and non-governmental organizations that has established a certain reputation for the religious voice in the UN system. And that is that the religious voice has a quality of expertise because it provides insights from the work of members who are there, present, working alongside members of communities that are the most vulnerable and the most excluded in our world. Religious voice is also understood to be one that is impartial because it is representing communities that span many nations and do not have any particular national identity. The voice of religious NGOs is also recognized as being a very credible one because, of course, religious community members are known to practice the values of care for human dignity, as well as care for the natural environment through your very dedicated lives of intentionality and service to others. And this demonstration of commitment to your values goes a long way to the credibility of your voice in a space like the UN. The religious voice is also one that provides a very important consistency and stability in the UN space because you are maintaining positions or opinions that are based on your constitutions and on principles that are much older than the United Nations itself, and in fact, older than many of the nations that are represented in the UN. And this continuity and stability in your position is very critical in the UN system because we see from year to year that political regimes will change and the contribution of a particular government might be very different from one year to the next. At one time, they may be very supportive of the flow of migrants into their country and open to the contributions of those migrants. And at another time, they may have the exact opposite position. And so there is always a risk in conversations that are happening at the UN that we could lose ground because the winds have changed politically and certain voices have changed their positions. And so the voices of civil society and of religious NGOs help to keep us on track and to at least sustain the progress that we have achieved in the past and not to lose ground or move backward when other political opinions may change among political leaders who are represented at the UN. And finally, another important quality to the religious voice is that it is a very collaborative one. Religious NGO representatives at the UN are always speaking and working through coalitions and committees And in this way, they are modeling for governments how they, as governments, can prioritize the common good and common goals ahead of their own individual glory or achievement or power. And of course, this kind of will for collaboration and shared progress is essential to moving ahead in any of the challenges that we face as a global community. So now I will share a little bit about what our advocacy looks like in practice. And one shorthand way that I try to describe advocacy, because it is such an expansive concept, is to divide it into 3 categories, which I've given the names of advocacy that is getting in the way, advocacy that is getting out of the way, and advocacy that is modeling a new way. And I will explain a bit about what I mean when I use each of these phrases. So first, to get in the way is any kind of action that allows us to occupy space in a place of power or a place of decision-making on behalf of those who cannot be in that space for some reason. Because of power structures and circumstances, they cannot be there for themselves to bring forward an issue of injustice that they are experiencing. They cannot be there to share their own perspective or experience, and so someone comes forward and speaks for them, who offers their perspective on their behalf. And so some of the ways that we do that through our UN advocacy are by making interventions or speaking from the floor of the UN during a meeting or a conference. Or sometimes we also submit statements in writing or recommendations in writing that are submitted to particular conferences or meetings between governments. We also engage in writing letters to seek meetings and conversations with representatives of governments who are there at the UN. And of course, we also take every opportunity to participate in the political systems of our own nations by voting or lobbying with our own government to the extent that that is possible for whichever country we are coming from individually. And sometimes we also engage in physical protest or demonstration that happens somewhere near the UN headquarters or near one of the offices of the member governments, the member states of the UN. And here are a few images of members of the JCoR community engaging in this form of advocacy, getting in the way. You can see them here participating in public demonstrations that are related to action on climate change, as well as ensuring women's rights and women's participation in processes of peace building. Speaking in the context of a UN conference, you can see there in the center, and meeting with representatives of governments in their offices, you can see at the bottom right. One concrete example of some work that we have done as JCoR in terms of getting in the way is an intervention that we engaged in at multiple levels for Father Stan Swami, who is a Jesuit priest who is being held as a political prisoner on false charges related to his work to support the rights of tribal peoples in India. And so to respond to this injustice, it was actually that religious in India became involved at the local level in joining public demonstrations to call for his release. And then at the global level, JCoR circulated a petition for his release, which ultimately collected almost 9,000 signatures from over 100 countries and territories. And this petition was submitted to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, who then went on to speak publicly against the imprisonment of Father Stan and called upon the Indian government for his release. Another example of getting in the way is some of the work that JCoR has done to support the rights of people in Haiti who are confronting tremendous violence for several years now, as well as a lack of a functioning political system. And this effort was initiated by a letter that we received from the leadership of CLAR, the Conference of Latin American Religious, expressing their concern about the increasing tension and violence in the country back in 2021. And since then, JCoR members who are at the UN have been working endlessly to develop messages through conversations with the members that we do have in Haiti to understand the situation better and to bring their experiences and perspectives into meetings that we have had with representatives of the governments of Canada, Mexico, Ireland, and others. We've also written letters to the Security Council and many members of the General Assembly who have a particular focus on Haiti. And we've participated in public marches and even conducted a major effort in collaboration with many groups who are based in the United States to lobby the government of the United States to take much stronger measures to prevent the flow of weapons from the US into Haiti as one of the root causes or root enabling factors that is contributing to the violence in Haiti. So the second category of advocacy is that getting out of the way. And this is superior to getting in the way whenever it is possible. And getting out of the way means using whatever space, whatever influence we have, and attempting to hand that over to someone who does not have access, who does not have power in that space, so that they have the opportunity to assert their own voices and to share their own perspectives and experiences and to speak for themselves rather than to have someone speak on their behalf. And so some of the ways that we can go about getting out of the way are by organizing events and opportunities for marginalized individuals to speak at the UN. We can provide either financial or technological support or training that may be needed in order to facilitate the participation of marginalized individuals in a UN meeting. We collect the testimony of groups that have been marginalized and submit it to a UN process or to share it directly with a member state of the UN. And we can also ensure that marginalized groups that we work with are aware whenever the UN offers an invitation or a call for input from anyone, anywhere in the world, which they sometimes do. We can ensure that marginalized groups are aware of that invitation and that opportunity that they have to assert their own voices and speak directly to those who are leading the UN system. And we can also recognize that where marginalized groups are organizing themselves and perhaps creating their own statements and putting them out through whatever communication network they have, we can use our own communication networks to amplify those statements, to help share them with more people and to build awareness to the voices of those marginalized groups who are already working to speak up and to speak for themselves. And so here are a few more images of our advocacy and ways that we have tried to get out of the way. The text that you see in the top left is a publication that was created by one of our members to highlight experiences of homelessness and housing insecurity. And so there we had direct quotations from a woman who was in Kenya and experiencing housing inadequacy. And this publication was circulated to many government representatives. We also offered multiple events, some online, some in person, in which we will have speakers who come from communities that are often not heard or not represented in a UN conversation, such as the one at the bottom right, which featured the voices of women from indigenous communities in several different parts of the world. And those three smaller images you see there are all from a hearing that we sponsored for the voices and experiences of Haitians. We have also engaged many years now in facilitating the participation of members of several indigenous communities from the Amazon region in an annual UN forum on indigenous issues. And we also provide a training that brings opportunities to members of the JCoR community from all over the world to be active participants in the process of monitoring the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals in their own country, and to join the proceedings of the UN conference that addresses or that offers a space to review progress toward the SDGs each year. And this is a program we offer through 8 months of virtual training, and through which we support participants' participation in the networks of civil society who are already reviewing the SDG progress in their own countries. And then we also offer a space for them to offer their own perspectives and their own critiques through a series of virtual events in which each of our members can share their own experiences and critiques of how well the SDGs are or are not being implemented in their own country. And one great success we have had in that program thus far is that we've actually had 2 of the participants in the program have the opportunity to speak inside the UN during the conference. There's a very small space for civil society to add their voice to the conversation and to speak on behalf of civil society for their whole country. And 2 participants in our program have been the ones to speak on behalf of their entire country's group of civil society in this conference. And the final mode of advocacy is modeling a new way. And what this means is essentially undertaking some very serious ongoing work to evaluate our own role as individuals and as congregations, our role in the very injustices that we are trying to reduce and eliminate in our world. And when we recognize that we have a role in some part of that injustice, then following through to modify our behavior so that we can lessen the burden that our own actions, our own lifestyles are placing on the ability of others to access their basic needs. And for the purpose that we do not want to be working against ourselves, but also because we recognize that by living our values and by ensuring that we are not participating any more than absolutely necessary in systems of injustice, we are also demonstrating in a powerful way to political leaders that it is possible to operate in a different way. We can take responsibility for the harms that we have caused in the past. We can engage in genuine collaboration for the common good. And we can make institutional changes in favor of justice, that all of these things are possible if we have the will. And so this means undertaking continuous assessment of what we buy, wear, and eat, what we consider to be trash, and how we dispose of that trash, how we travel and how often, where we invest our money, and whose money that we are willing to accept, either personally or institutionally. It also means assessing how responsibly we communicate and how we use media. And it's also about how willing we are and how adept we are at working with others for a common goal. And all of this assessment and all of this behavior modification are absolutely essential to advocacy, because in a conversation with government, it would not be strange for the attitude of the government representative to be that they may agree with a lot of the ideas and ideals that we are presenting to them and that we are recommending. But at the same time, they may say, you know, it sounds wonderful, but it's really not possible. And you don't understand the complications and the nuances that what you're asking for, it's not really achievable. And the best possible and most powerful answer that we can have to that attitude is to be able to offer specific, concrete examples of the ways in which we are already doing the exact thing that we are asking them to do. Because then there is no answer that they can make to us from their side to say it's not possible, when we're saying, no, it is, because look, this is how we're already doing it. And we would very much like to work with you to help bring this onto the national scale and then the global scale to make it real for everyone and not just in our one small community here. And so some of the ways that we engage in this modeling a new way for the governments who are represented at the UN is by working primarily through coalitions and committees that are dedicated to specific categories of injustice that need to be addressed at the global level. And so I have on the screen here several different committees that are led by and heavily participated in by the religious NGOs who are part of JCoR. And those committees include those that are dedicated to just financing for development, to social development, which is the reduction of social inequalities, to ending trafficking in persons, to achieving gender equality and supporting the rights of women and girls, to addressing the damaging work of mining industries and especially its impact on the human right to water. Another committee to address homelessness. Another addressing the rights of Indigenous peoples. And another addressing migration. And I want to make a note of a particularly clear victory that was achieved through the work of the Working Group to End Homelessness, which is a group that was actually founded by several members of JCoR here at the UN, and which had the great success of bringing the issue of housing and homelessness into the UN conversation in a more direct way than it ever had been before, by bringing the topic and the concern of housing and homelessness to be a primary theme of one of the major UN conferences, and also by achieving the step forward of getting the UN to agree on a common understanding or description of what we actually mean when we use the term homelessness. And while that may seem insignificant, it is definitely a crucial step in any UN process that in order for something to be addressed, we need for it to be something that we can measure. And if it's something that we can measure, then we first need to define what it is that we are measuring. So this is really a critical foundation to bringing the issue of homelessness onto the global agenda of the United Nations. And to offer another example of ways that we model good behavior for government, in many of our written statements that we submit to a UN conference, there will be a section of the statement that is dedicated to offering specific examples of good practices that our congregations are implementing at the local level. And so here I just have a couple examples from a statement that was written on the issue of gender equality in combination with work to address environmental destruction. And so you can see on the screen here, we have examples of specific ministries from the Sisters of St. Joseph of Annecy and the Canossian Daughters of Charity, Servants of the Poor in India, who were working to support poor, migrant, and tribal women and girls who had been displaced by cyclones and other environmental disasters. And we also have an example here of the work of the Society of the Sacred Heart in Mexico, who had been integrating environmental sustainability into both the curriculum and the culture of their schools there in Mexico. Before I proceed any further, I want to pause again and ask if there are any questions about why religious engage in the UN system or how we engage in the UN system, or anything about those three categories of advocacy: getting in the way, getting out of the way, modeling a new way. I do see a question in the chat box regarding, are we going to ask something specific of you, or something, some way that you can get involved? Yes, that will be the last part of our input today. We will very happily discuss ways that you, as well as your membership as a whole, can be more and more involved in this collective work. And we will share some details on that in just a minute. Yes, Rowena?
Yeah, I just want to check out, you spoke about, advocacy and your, like, for example, Father Stan Swami, from India, and since I'm from India, the UN, you wrote to ask the government to release him. Do you all follow up on what happens after that? Or because, of course, we all know that he was not released and he died in prison. So, how would you take that forward?
So yes, that was unfortunately the outcome of that particular situation. And in terms of follow-up from that point onward, we take cues from the local networks that are addressing any particular issue, whether it's that one of political imprisonment, or any other issue that a local network might choose to prioritize. And in the case of India in particular, we recognize that there are a lot of security challenges around speaking publicly, which is, of course, the root of the imprisonment of Father Stan to begin with. And so in each moment, we will persist in addressing an issue as long as the regional network sees that as a priority. We will, in some cases, we continue to follow the same issue and the same concern for several years. And in some cases, we will only focus on a particular issue for a shorter period of time. And that is all dependent on the position of the local or the regional network in what is a priority at this moment. So it varies from place to place and from issue to issue. But as you can imagine, there are so many issues for any network to follow at any time that we are in the process of constant assessment of, where shall we put our energy or our attention at this moment. And so we are constantly assessing where we think we can be the most effective, and where perhaps there is a great need for attention that we are not getting from, say, the media or other sources in the world who are in a position to offer some insight or to shine light on a situation. These are all factors that we try to keep in mind when prioritizing where we will speak and where we will act.
Thank you.
Okay, and I see a question from Ans. Which of the 3 ways or categories of advocacy is harder to engage our members in, and why is it harder in our experience? I think the hardest form of advocacy to actually achieve is the third one, which is modeling a new way. It's the biggest challenge because it requires a lot more than words. It requires years of work and personal development, institutional shaping, and even establishing culture within our own institutions. It is long-term work. I put those examples of specific ministry practices, and it took maybe 20 minutes to put those on paper, but it took many years for those ministries and good practices to be established and to be carried out. And so that is the most difficult work. However, it is maybe the most intuitive and natural response of religious congregations. I think you all tend to understand the need for practical and concrete response to challenges and to situations of injustice where you see them at the local level. And that is how your ministries have mostly been developed throughout your whole history. And so while that is the hardest to do, it is probably the one that you are already the most engaged in across the globe, and the one that feels the most gratifying, and that you are the most eager to engage in when we talk about advocacy. So to the question of engagement, I think the biggest or the most challenging probably is the getting out of the way. And there are many reasons for that. Some are very practical. It is a matter of, how difficult it is to physically bring someone to a place like the UN to speak up and to share their experience. For others, when we offer virtual opportunities, it's not always available for anyone due to not having an internet connection or not having electricity from wherever they are. So there are a lot of practical challenges to the getting out of the way. And of course, it also requires more time from the person who is already having the experience. And as we know, everyone has 1 million demands on their time. And so there's a great challenge in bringing advocacy to the point of priority when you are confronted with challenges and needs on a daily basis that are right in front of you, and they are in the form of a human face and a human person that needs your care and your attention. it's harder to think of how do we create time and space to speak about this and to share this experience somewhere else where decisions are being made when there's so much need right in front of me. And so I think breaking through the sense that advocacy is something extra, advocacy is more work, it needs to be added on to the work that I am already doing. I think a big challenge for us is to shift our minds as a global community to understand advocacy as integral to every ministry, because to serve the person in front of me who is in need of care and attention means not only to meet the need that they are presenting with me today, but also to care for them for their whole lifetime and for their children's lifetime and for their whole community by addressing the cause of their need. And so both of these are part of my ministry of serving this person right here in front of me. And both are so important. And so shifting that mindset, I think, is a big challenge for us to understand and to be motivated to engage in that form of advocacy of getting out of the way. Melba, go ahead.
Yes. Hi. Solo que, bueno, voy a hablar en español.
I'm going to speak in Spanish.
Realmente es una gran oportunidad
It
tener esta
is
formación y yo
really a
estaba reflexionando que siempre
but
será un reto en cómo participar, cómo
will
comprometernos,
it will always be a
pero
challenge.
yo veo que una de las maneras de trabajar por la justicia es como lo que es en sí JCoR. Es una
On
coalición
justice is
de religiosas, religiosos
the very
con
reason of
un
being
objetivo
of
concreto
JCoR,
y
which is a
tenemos en
coalition
nuestras
of religious men and
regiones
women that get together with a
los grupos
particular
JPIC en las
purpose.
conferencias de
And I think that's
religiosos y
also
otras asociaciones donde podemos hacer incidencia.
raison d'être,
Yo siento que hay
the
que
reason
empezar por
for
allí
the
y
religious
implica también
conferences
un
and for the
análisis
JPIC
de la
groups.
realidad
And I think
constante.
we need to
Vemos que
start
ahorita la realidad
having a permanent,
cambia
a
y las
continuous assessment
índices,
of
o vamos a
reality,
decir así,
because
las
reality
signos con los
changes all
cuales
the time,
leíamos la
and the
realidad
signs of the times
está
that
cambiando mucho
we read in reality
últimamente
change
y lo que nos está diciendo ahorita es que
and what we are
tenemos que
seeing now
estar
is that we
unidos
need
en
to work
cooperación,
together, to cooperate.
en tener
We need
voz
to
colectivas. O sea, entre más colectiva sea la voz, creo que será mejor. Por supuesto, si no todos y todas las congregaciones tal vez podrán estar representadas en las Naciones Unidas, pero sí su voz puede llegar por
what they
medio de estos grupos
can
hasta
through
el
these
lugar
coalitions
donde habrá
can
un
get
escrito,
there
habrá
through these
una
coalitions,
declaración
through writings, through common
donde se ve reflejada
declarations
la lucha
or
diaria
letters
de los pueblos,
where
todos los que sufren. Entonces, eso es lo que quería decir. Gracias. Mi congregación Corazón de Notre Dame.
the Congregation of Notre
Y
Dame.
veo aquí
And I
a las
see
representantes,
here
la hermana que es del
representatives,
Consejo General
one
y
sister
la
from our
coordinadora
General Council
de
and
Justicia
the
Social.
JPIC coordinator from my congregation. They are here.
Thanks, Melba. And I see another question in the chat box. Does the application of any of these three categories of advocacy depend on the particular issue, and can they be layered or combined? And I would say definitely in answer to both, that, with each situation, we have to assess what will be the most strategic and what will be the most safe way to approach our advocacy. And that will be different in every single situation. And it depends where the issue is occurring. It depends what kind of action we think will be persuasive or effective. It will change each time. But certainly a wonderful advocacy initiative might include actions from each different category, and those can be combined in any manner if we have the time and the ability to conduct them all, and if we think that they will all be effective. Ideally, we will do everything to address an issue. Okay, and I think we will move on to the last bit of our input and our time together, which is to talk about what we are asking for and hoping for from all of you, from your positions as leaders of your congregations, or as promoters, or formators, or representatives of your congregations who are dedicated to justice, peace, and integrity of creation. And these are just a few specific examples, although I will say if you are able to have a conversation about this with your own UN representative after this meeting today, I'm sure they may have some more specific ideas and requests that they would love to discuss with you. So I hope that each of you will be able to find some time to discuss this all further with your own UN representative. But here are a few common ideas that have emerged from our discussions as a whole community of UN representatives and from our work as JCoR. So the first is that we could very much use your help in promoting a greater congregation-wide understanding of advocacy as an essential component of every ministry, with an understanding that it is integral to addressing the root cause of any suffering that we are seeing at the community level. So kind of that point that I was just making a moment ago about how to make advocacy a passion and a priority, even when we're being faced with a lot of immediate need. We would also be very grateful to the extent that you're able to integrate updates from your own UN office, the office of your congregation, to all of your congregation's communication platforms. However that might be organized within your congregation, we would love for the work of your UN office to be communicated more widely and perhaps more systematically, however that is done in your congregation. We could also very much use your support as champions to continue funding allocations to maintain the presence of a congregational representative at the UN. Though JCoR does have an office of two, Katie and myself here, there is a lot of work being done at all times by all of your UN representatives who all do the work of JCoR and who enable all of the efforts that we described earlier. They're really the shared work of all of your UN representatives, and we could not accomplish it without their presence here and all of their contributions. And so we know that it is a challenge, and that the question may be raised: can we afford to do this? Can we continue this ministry? And we would make a plea to all of you to be champions of maintaining that presence, which is so essential to having this voice, this religious voice that we described earlier in the session. Without your UN representatives, there is no pathway for that voice at this level. We would always also ask, to the extent that it's possible, to allow for some meaningful time of overlap in the context of a transition from one UN representative to a new UN representative. Often we understand that circumstances don't allow for that, but whenever it's possible, it's a huge help that the outgoing representative has some time to train and create an orientation for the incoming representative. And we would also ask if it's possible, and if you have not already, to make a visit to your UN office and possibly to create opportunities for other members of the congregation to participate in UN conferences, because it's really through participation and the presence that I think we can fully understand the value and the possibility of what can be achieved by religious representatives in a space like the UN. And finally, and this goes out to all of you as leaders or JPIC persons, is to encourage the ongoing engagement of your members with your own congregation's UN office and with JCoR, and to offer some specific details on how to engage with JCoR in the long term. I'm going to hand the floor back over to Katie to describe some of these pathways to participation.
Thanks, Teresa. So as Teresa just elaborated for all of us, one of the best ways to connect with JCoR and our work is to reach out to and contact and connect with the representative of your congregation's office at the UN. And we are very lucky to have a significant number of those representatives on the call with us today. These individuals are a vital source of knowledge and wisdom waiting to be shared with you. We also encourage you to reach out to both Teresa and myself, who work out of our UN office here in New York. And you can contact our regional coordinators as well. Again, we are going to be sharing all of this information on the screen with how to contact these individuals. You can also find it on our website via the link that I've shared multiple times in the chat box, and I'll put it in the chat box again when we're done. And then perhaps the place I would like to highlight the most for you in terms of where you can find our resources and ways to connect with us and our work is to visit our website, which is a vast repository of free resources for you to be able to utilize and share with your networks. On our website, you can learn more about the Justice Coalition of Religious. You can learn more about all of our member organizations and connect with our staff. You can also learn about all of our upcoming events, access recordings of past events and past education sessions. You can access key information, background information on the United Nations, and you can access joint statements that we have submitted to official UN conferences. And we also provide UN conference engagement guides, which I'll touch on in just a moment. I also want to highlight that the most comprehensive resource we offer that can be delivered right to your email inbox to provide you with all of our resources and updates from our UN offices and each of our regional coordinators is to subscribe to our monthly bulletin. As Teresa mentioned earlier today, we also have WhatsApp groups, which have formed following each of our regional workshops to facilitate continued collaboration amongst those groups at the local level and to share information about upcoming events, both educational and action items that we can take in terms of advocacy initiatives that you can get involved in. And again, we have links to all of this and how you can express your interest in joining these groups, if you so desire to, on that webpage link that we're going to share. And then, of course, you can also connect with us and engage with us on social media. We currently have active presence on Facebook, on YouTube, and on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great way for you not only to connect with JCoR, but also to connect with many members of our network and find out if they are working on similar issues to yourself. And then again, as Teresa previously mentioned, a lot is coming full circle here at the end. We are currently offering our annual program, a training session for digital delegates of religious NGOs to the high-level political forum on sustainable development. On the screen in front of you, you should be able to see the dates of those program sessions. We have already had the first 2 sessions for this year's program. However, we are posting the recordings of those sessions online. So if someone in your network or yourself still wants to join in on that educational opportunity, you can watch the recordings and get caught up before joining our next session on the 31st of March. And again, I think one of the resources that we receive the most feedback on and that we see most shared amongst our networks are guides to major UN conferences. As we've already come to know a little bit through Teresa's presentation today, there's a lot that goes on at the United Nations that uses terminology and frameworks that are not necessarily common knowledge. And so in order to enable our global community to fully participate and engage in the processes that take place here at the UN, we create engagement guides, which we make available in English, Spanish, French, and Portuguese for what we see as the main conferences in which our global community might want to participate. These guides contain all kinds of information from key background terminology that you need to know, where and when these events are happening and how you can follow them online, some calls to action, and also recommended events by our religious community here at the United Nations. And the events that we highlight in these guides range on topics from Indigenous peoples and their rights to climate change, the Commission on the Status of Women, the Commission for Social Development, and of course, the high-level political forum on sustainable development. And the final resource or virtual space that we offer for engagement that I would like to highlight is what we call our Global Community Hour. We offer this virtual space on Zoom that Teresa and I facilitate along with some of our members here in New York. And this happens on the second Friday of every single month. And it is a space for all members of our global community to come together and join in prayer and reflection on a specific theme. We also provide updates from both our United Nations office as well as from our regional coordinators. And then we open up the space for all of our global community members to be able to share and express emerging concerns and justice issues in their region. And again, I'm going to drop the one main link to our website that will contain links to all of those different resources that we just shared. Thanks so much for your attention. I know this was long and we kept you a few minutes over, but I really appreciate it. And I will hand it back over to Teresa as we open the floor for questions.
Thank you, Katie. So a lot of exciting invitations that, well, we hope you find exciting and that you might be excited to also share with the full membership of your congregations. And part of the benefit of being part of the governing members of JCoR is that you can also participate in helping to shape all of those resources and those means of participation. So if indeed you have other ideas about how you think your members might like to participate or ways that would make it easier for them to participate, the work of JCoR is a ball of clay that you too can have your hands in the process of shaping. And so we hope that if you have any thoughts and reflections on that, that you will know that our door is open to you as well as the door to your own UN representative's office. And we hope that you will participate as much as possible in both the shaping of the work of the coalition, as well as engaging in some of the modes of participation that we already offer. So in this last moment together, I will ask one more time if there are any questions that anyone has, or if there's anything that we could clarify for you.
Teresa, I do have a question from Tim in the chat box that I think requires more space than what I could respond to in the chat box. So if Tim is still with us, do you want to unmute yourself and ask us your question about how we make decisions on what advocacy we undertake?
Sure. Yeah, there's so many issues, as you mentioned earlier, that bubble up from all the grassroots connections you have. How do you prioritize which issues to engage and then the strategy to use?
Yes, that is certainly a challenge, Tim. And some of the ways that we attempt to select priorities are by looking at issues that we feel are being under addressed by other actors or other groups within civil society. We look for things that we feel that our own congregations and communities are particularly well positioned to address based on where we are and what communities we are working within and who we know, who could lend a valuable voice to the issue. And we also look at how many different congregations are seeing a particular issue as a priority. So there's kind of a collective decision-making process that we engage in. But all of that is very much led by the input that we receive from the regional networks, who are kind of always on the watch for new areas of concern, which we're always looking for input from them to help raise issues in the first place. We're not, going necessarily to major news outlets to see what's important and what is happening in the world, but to seek what is the news and what are the priorities from our own membership. And then from there, to use some of those other filters, I'll say, for lack of a better phrase, to help to choose where we really think we can be the most effective. And in some cases, it's, we'll engage at different depths on different issues based on what we think is possible, what we think is safe, and what we think is effective. And that's a short answer to a deep question, but hopefully I begin to address what you're asking.
Yes, you are. Thank you very much.
I do not see any other hands being raised. So to conclude then, I just want to offer a word of thanks to all of you. I know that your time is extremely precious. As leaders, you are often traveling around the globe and living out of your suitcases. And your time is so precious, and we are really, truly grateful that you are willing to spend some of it with us today, and to be introduced or reintroduced to the work of JCoR and to the work of your own UN representative at the UN. And I want to underscore or to leave us with a proverb that I find very relevant to the work that we do and how we do it, which is this idea that when spider webs unite, they can tie up a lion. And I think we are facing many different lions of many different colors in our world right now. And the work of justice and peace often appears very overwhelming, and it would be very easy for us to see it as impossible. And so it is so important for us to have the approach of working in coalition, that we are not, we are not one entity, we're not one web that is attempting to tie up a huge challenge, but in fact that we are many webs interwoven and laid upon one another, that is a network of true strength, and that so much more is possible in terms of justice and peace because we are working together. And so I thank you for being part of that web of webs, and making us the strongest coalition and the strongest voice for justice and for peace that we can possibly be. Well, thank you very much for all of your time. And we hope that we will see you and engage with you in a variety of those other spaces and pathways that we have discussed today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you.
you, Teresa
all
and
of you
everybody.
for all the work you are
Thank
doing for
you.
us.
Thank
We are
you.
grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.